Greetings, Mayhemers. So it's been a while since I've done an episode for y'all, but I figured I'd get on here after needing some time off to recharge my batteries and sort of get busy with some work and some real life stuff. But back in February, I was requested to do a little bit of a talk on climate change for my next podcast episode and how to hedge your bets with that topic because, like a lot of ideas lately. It's completely polarized politically, even though it probably shouldn't be, considering the fact that it affects everybody. Not only everybody who's alive today, but everybody who's going to be alive anytime in the next 100 years, if we even make it that far. But, the reason I want to talk about this is not only just to sort of get some information out there, but how to talk about this subject with people in your life that you think maybe need to change their minds a little bit. I mean, and part of the reason it's hard to change people's minds is because people tend to be a little bit extreme. When I think about extremes in an argument of climate change, I might think of, oh, I don't know, a flat earthing, redneck, gun-toting person who just thinks that everything liberals do is terrible and that, God, country, and meth, or whatever the hell they believe in. Then you think of like the fedora tipping incel. This guy has somewhat of an IQ, but refuses to believe anything mainstream whatsoever because apparently it's hip to be smart about stupid shit. Well, that's fine and fucking dandy. Winning arguments on the internet isn't fucking everything. But on the other end of that, though, you have some tropes on the left, that are really hard to relate to as well. You have your, passionate liberal hippie protester or, your wombat hat wearing science friend who's too smart to understand for the regular person. So, I mean, it's kind of a weird discussion to have when, most people don't fall on those two extremes, even if they'd like to believe that they do. Most people are either, working class or middle class people who are relatively moderate in their political views. You may think of, an uncle that you have that works construction or somebody along those lines who otherwise is a well-meaning person but chooses to buy into this idea that climate change is a hoax. I want to start by just saying the idea of it being a hoax is pretty fucking dumb. Just like every other fucking conspiracy theory out there, it gives people way too much credit for planning, time, and money. Really, people are trying to profit most of the time, and a lot of things are funded, motivated by lobbyists and big corporations and shit like that. But when it comes to, having a several decades long hoax, I don't understand why. Why would you think that that's a hoax? I know you're not dumb enough to actually believe that looking outside of your window and seeing snow is enough to make that a hoax. I mean, it's obviously different than that. We're going to talk about the basics of climate change and how it really kind of shakes out here in a minute. But, when you think about what this means in terms of politics, I just kind of want to get this out of the way right now. For conservatives, the reason why climate change is a hard topic is because A, fixing what we've already done is really, really expensive. I mean, there's no way to deploy the amount of technology or retrofit the amount of engineering that we would need to do cheaply. There's no way to do it with, an incredible amount of profit. It doesn't benefit, the business and law interests or political interests of big business and capitalistic marketing. Unfortunately, climate change is something that has to be done simultaneously on a global scale, and sort of mitigating against the damages that we've caused is going to be costly and terrible. But I hope that listening to my video, if you're, a person who believes that climate change is a hoax, is enough to convince you to change your mind, because there's a lot of reasons why it isn't a hoax, first of all, but even if you still believe that it is a hoax, you might as well bet against it, because quite simply, it's a matter of the planet having a future or not, us as a species having a future or not. It's thrusting us, much, much closer to the sixth mass extinction event on the Earth and we will be a part of that. There's really no getting around it. Um, but I don't think you have to be extreme and have to think that far ahead to really want to believe in it. You don't have to become a liberal. You know, you don't have to become a granola chewing hippie stereotype. You don't. You know, there's other people doing that, and you're not that person, and that's fine. For those of you who are, you need to learn to have this conversation with people who aren't, because otherwise you're just talking to people who believe the same things that you do, or you're talking to people who don't believe the same things that you do, probably ineffectively. So that's kind of what we're going to go over today, is not just the basics of the whole problem and hopefully, you know, changing the minds of some of my viewers, but for the rest of you, you know, hopefully maybe giving you a little bit of armament about how to have this conversation with your working class or middle class conservative friends and family that otherwise may be moderate or, you know, may be willing to budge on this one issue. I mean, when I think about it, I think about my own folks, you know, they're both conservative, but they've also both been recycling my whole life. They're not entirely against the idea of saving the planet. You know, they try to drive more efficient vehicles. They try to reduce their energy bill and their carbon footprint and things like that. And there's nothing even remotely hippie-ish about them. So it just goes to show you, you don't have to be a living stereotype in order to change the way you live your life. There may be things that you're already doing. If you're buying energy efficient appliances or doing other things to reduce your carbon footprint, then you're already moving in the right direction. The problem is, though, is that getting from here to there, where we're mitigating against the damages that come from climate change, is going to take more than those individual actions that we take in our day-to-day lives. It's going to take more than recycling or driving a Prius or whatever. Unfortunately, it's going to be, you know, a lot of policy making and deploying technology on a massive scale. And I don't even know if we have the time left to do it, but we're at a critical juncture in our history right now where we have a choice to save our planet, save ourselves as a species, you know, keep the world alive for our grandchildren and their grandchildren's grandchildren. I mean, to me, that seems like a cause that sort of transcends any individual political ideology or religious belief. But, you know, while we're doing that, I'm going to go ahead and get us started on some basics here. So if I did this right, you should be looking at my screen right now. And what I've got here is a PDF, and I'll provide the links in the description of the video. But this is the basics of climate change. This is sort of worded at roughly an 8th grade level, and it's a great tool just to kind of familiarize yourself with sort of the overview of what's going on. Basically what it's talking about is the greenhouse effect. So basically what it is that human emissions, whether it be carbon dioxide, methane, or hollow carbons, are trapping, you know, solar radiation inside of the atmosphere and raising the average temperature of the globe. And this little document is a very handy, easy way to understand the general way that it's working and how we've been looking at it. Okay, so here's a little bit about how human activities have added greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. So it says here that the atmospheric concentrations of carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide have increased significantly since the Industrial Revolution began. In the case of carbon dioxide, the average concentration measured at the Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii has risen 316 parts per million in 1959 to 396 parts per million in 2013. So we're going to go down, and it's going to show us a little bit of a graph. Okay, so that's just a general idea of how it's increased. Okay, I'm not going to go over all the details of this document real drastically. And then here's another graph that shows CO2 concentrations, you know, since for the last 1,000 years. A little bit about, you know, what greenhouse gases are. I'm going to trust you to read this on your own time. I mean, if you really need to arm yourself with this knowledge, this is a quick and easy way to learn about it. You don't have to be a scientist to understand it. And you don't have to, you know, thrust all this information down people's throat. I mean, it's a matter of, you know, trying to convince our policymakers to work on getting CO2 out of our atmosphere. And that should be something that should be bipartisan. It should be human. It should be global. It should be something that we're all doing. So, I mean, obviously, if you read through this document, you're going to find that the evidence to support that climate change is influenced by humans is pretty substantial. So, um, when you have this argument with people, they're going to tell you things like, well, it's a natural cycle. We move from ice age to ice age, and there's always a warming period. We're in the Holocene period right now, and we're just moving toward another ice age. I mean, and that's fine and dandy, but I don't think that our previous ice ages were predicated by a species introducing massive amounts of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. I mean, essentially, what we're doing is stomping on the gas pedal about it, and we're driving into a brick wall. I mean, you have right now, millions of people that are displaced by rising sea levels. People have had to move inland. You have, coral reefs being completely bleached out by, solar radiation and industrial pollution. You have, the polar ice caps on both poles are melting and causing the sea level to rise. And I mean, this is all stuff that, has been talked about for decades, but nobody really wants to do anything about it because rather than being a survival issue, it's a political issue, it's a voting issue, it's an issue about belief. And in this case, clinging to your beliefs is not going to do any good. I mean, there's no point in it. I mean, your beliefs aren't changing the atmosphere and they're not doing anything. And we have a bit of a timeline to abide by, and I think that's what most people don't understand. Um, we'll talk about that here in a minute. But what I want you to think about, if you're, one of my more conservative viewers, I want you to think about, like, what's the point in denying that? Like, it's not benefiting anyone. It's not even benefiting you. I mean, you still have to go to work, and whether you're doing your part to help doesn't change the fact that you're going to have to go to work. So why not be a good person? I mean, why not act in the best interest of future generations or our generations right now? I mean, I don't particularly understand the logic of it, but I don't even understand the emotional appeal of it. I mean, I think most of us try to think of ourselves as generally good people. But what's good about flushing the planet down the toilet? There's nothing good about that. It's not a good choice. It's not a good choice of something to believe in. It's not a good choice of something to do. And it's not a good choice to let other people get away with doing that shit either. So, I mean, I guess I don't understand that basic logic other than that your pet politician told you to fucking think that way. Well, I mean, we're all guilty of that. We do that, but this is higher stakes. This is, life or death eventually. So the next thing that I want to bring your attention to is going to be this IPCC report. So this is a report that's generated every so often by an international panel of scientists and climatologists and whatnot to talk about greenhouse emissions and environmental policy. So they set this benchmark of 1.5 degrees Celsius. I believe that that's about how much we can get away with letting it go up before things really start to get funky for us. Okay, so what they've said here is that limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius would require rapid, far-reaching, and unprecedented changes in all aspects of society. Okay, so I mean that's the opening statement. All right, that's not the thing that they're building up to. It's not the ultimate crescendo of this report. That's how they started. That's how they're introducing this topic, and I want to stress that. Drastic changes across all levels of society. I mean, that's kind of what I'm getting at. It is a global issue. It's a human issue. It's an issue of life, and it's an issue of being able to live. I mean, because you really can't, cling on to your dumb fucking beliefs if the planet is dead and you're dead and we're all dead. We need to have a living planet in order for us to continue being stupid. So let's just think about that for a minute. So let's see here. Yeah, it talks a little bit about all the science that's gone into it. I mean, other than taking, consistent measurements over time, over 6,000 scientific references were, contributing to this data. And I'm not going to go into the data. I'm just going to go over this introductory statement and kind of what they're calling for. This report is enormous, And I believe that if you're even remotely interested in this topic, you will spend some time combing through it on your own. So here they're talking about what would happen if we can, limit global warming to that 1.5 degrees Celsius benchmark as opposed to 2 degrees Celsius. So they mention here that by 2100, global sea level rise would be 10 centimeters lower with global warming of 1.5 compared to 2. Okay, so they're not even talking about reversing or fixing climate change. They're talking about slowing it down. They're talking about mitigating the damage, and that's really where we're at. Okay, and if I remember reading all of this correctly, we have about 12 years or so to truly accomplish this and hit this benchmark. We're already seeing the coral reefs taking a hard hit. Let's see here. They're talking about a difference between 70 to 90% with global warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius, where all of them would be lost with 2 degrees Celsius. I mean, that's like, deciding between a bullet to the gut and a bullet to the brain. You might survive the one. Okay. They're basically what they're talking about here is, how every little piece of temperature that we can mitigate against is meaningful. Okay, so this report is really well known. I will also include this link in the video description, but I want you guys to take a deep look at this when you're talking and you're having your little, internet debates or talking with your relatives or whatever about climate change. This is pretty much the central piece of scientific data that you need to actually be well informed on the topic right now. I'm not surprised that I am surprised that people from both sides of the ball field aren't just kind of teasing this all apart and working to push some of our, money and policy making towards developing some technology to start mitigating our CO2 emissions. Anyhow, coming back, so that's another thing is that there is a benchmark. We are at a critical point, a critical intersection in time and history where we literally have the ability to be less stupid than we've been through our entire history. We could actually make a smart choice and start mitigating against climate change. Now, a lot of people have to rely on their own experiences about what they believe. So, a lot of people who live in the Midwest or in the northern reaches or far southern reaches of any landmass are going to look outside and say, well, it's snowing and it's cold. I don't see any evidence of global warming. I've seen summers around here in the 90 degrees or whatever. I mean, I don't believe it. I think it's just something that, politicians are doing to pull votes or some corporation is doing to make money. And I can't deny that some of that might not be true along the way. I mean, people are fucking people. Everybody's just as screwy and corrupt as everybody else. But, I mean, dying sucks no matter what kind of person you are. So, what I want to consider moving forward then is, even if it is a hoax, or even if you really still believe that it's a hoax, what if it's not? And what's the harm in going along with it? Because if it isn't, then you still made the right choice, even if you weren't really incredibly smart about it. While we were having our polar vortex, I don't know if I already mentioned this, but Australia had a record heat wave for the same exact amount of time that was wiping out, animals, just cooking them alive in trees. While bats were sleeping during the day, they were coming up dead because they were dead. They were cooked alive. I mean, I don't have any other better way of saying that. And I didn't really spend a lot of time rehearsing or preparing for this one tonight. I just wanted to get it done because it's been weighing on my mind for a few weeks now. And I just feel like I need to say some shit about this. Now, I spent obviously a little bit of time talking about how certain people seem dumb because they deny climate change. But for people who do believe in climate change, I'm going to probably talk a little bit about why some of you are dumb too. Okay? If you're spending your time talking to your friends and relatives like they're stupid, I mean, granted, humans are stupid. We make dumb choices. You look at our history, I mean, the evidence is pretty fucking clear. We advance technologically, and that's about it. But when you're having this discussion with, say, your working class uncle, who works in construction, let's say he's politically moderate, votes a little more conservative, but I mean, he has, his heart on some social issues or, something along those lines, but he's a fiscal conservative and tends to vote either moderate conservative or very central liberal, okay? This is a person you can probably have this discussion with, and I can tell you that it's a lot easier to have these discussions face to face than it is in person. Because people aren't going to be such shits when you're sitting down in front of them and having a talk. I mean, some will, but by and large, most won't. Most people are a little more receptive to the ideas of other people when they're sitting down and kind of having a nice talk about it. They don't necessarily have to agree on all the fine points of it, but, I think that any two people, I mean, unless you're a nihilist, can agree that, the planet's worth saving. It's the only one we've got. But the problem is, that I see, especially on social media and whatnot, is the approach that a lot of liberals take when having this talk with people. It's perfectly fine to feel more intelligent than the person you're talking to. It's perfectly fine to get frustrated with people for being idiots. It's gonna happen. We're human. We all react to shit, in certain ways. But you know, if you're really interested in changing minds, then don't spend all of your time being a liberal stereotype. Find a way to meet the moderate person in moderate territory and show them where the issue overlaps with their life. Show them real things that they can do or voting that they can do, to help them, maybe helping them find candidates on their own side who have, issues that they're running with that support fixing climate change, right? I mean, I know that mostly you're going to find those people on the left, but there's got to be at least a couple of conservatives out there that are concerned about the environment. I mean, when I was looking, doing a little bit of internet searching before I started this video, I did notice that, I mean, there's, you know, uh, climate change advocacy groups for every major religion out there. There's Catholics for, climate change. There's, Lutherans, there's Mennonites, there's all sorts of different websites out there for groups of people that aren't traditionally liberal to work on climate change. And I believe that some people have already cued into the idea that this is not specifically about your political leaning. And if you're pushing this issue based solely on the way that you're politically leaning, then you're missing the point. The point is that it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter unless you really want us to just run the planet in the ground. Then, uh, well, that's your prerogative, I guess. But I think the rest of us kind of want it to be around for our kids and their kids and their kids' kids. But I mean, who knows? What the fuck do I know? I'm just some dumbass from Michigan. But um, so I mean, the next thing I want to kind of take a look at is all the species that went extinct in 2018. Okay, so, and the ones on the brink for 2019. So, I'm sure that, if you read anything on the, social media besides dumbass memes and stupid political shit, you probably have noticed that we've been having a lot of extinctions over the past 4 or 5 years. I mean, I know that it happens all the time anyways, but really, our attention is starting to be drawn, you know, we're at 1 to 10,000 times the natural rate. Okay, wow, okay. Anyhow, we are in the midst of the sixth mass extinction of plants and animals, the sixth wave of extinctions in the past half-billion years. We're currently experiencing the worst state of species die-offs since the loss of dinosaurs 65 million years ago. Now remember, the dinosaurs died most likely because an asteroid or meteorite crashed into the planet and created a cloud of dust that occluded sunlight and pushed the ultraviolet radiation out of the atmosphere, effectively creating a nuclear winter. Right? I mean, that's one way to get rid of life. I mean, the other way is with extreme heat. And the way that looks for us is basically that when things start to get sour, and the reason they're getting sour right now is because of our greenhouse gases and whatnot, we start losing little species along the way. I'm not going to sit here and go over all of them. I just wanted to kind of bring that to your attention because all of this stuff kind of ties together, and I'm kind of just all over the place right now. But the point is, basically, the part of the consequence of what's happening right now is we're not just moving into another mini ice age. All right, we've had other miniature ice ages and warming periods before. Humanity has survived at least one. But those are not all predicated by mass extinctions. They're not all, concurrent with mass extinctions. This one's a little different. What we're doing right now is kind of the opposite of what happened with the dinosaurs. Rather than, shutting out all of the radiation from the sun, we're trapping too much of it here. Okay, what that's doing is slowly increasing the overall average temperature of the globe. Now, this is where people get confused because they're like, boy, it doesn't feel any warmer out, blah, 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 blah. Well, the thing is what's happening is over time, the highs are outweighing the lows across many points or all points on the globe. They're taking an average number, okay? Now, if you don't understand what averages are, just do a quick Google search. I'm sure there's some really easy examples about how to find things like mean, median, and mode, okay? But the point is that we now have a prerogative, to stop global warming to less than 1.5 degrees Celsius, if possible, within the next 10 to 12 years. Or, however long it takes. But the longer we wait, the worse things get. I was just reading an article, I don't know if I have it pulled up here, but about topsoil loss. Hold on here. Okay, give me just a second. I'm trying to pull up something I had up before and lost it. Here we go. Scientific American. That is a good, reliable source, so we're going to switch to that. All right. Let's get down, shift. All right. So if I did that right, you are looking at an article in Scientific American. Only 60 years of farming left if soil degradation continues, and this ties into the rest of everything. Now, we know that within 60 years, the earth is going to turn sour, okay? The ground is going to stop producing, mainly because we have a lot of insect species dying off, in addition to all of the rest of our flora and fauna that is starting to go because of all the various things that we do to hurt the planet. And the simple fact of the matter is you should be able to look at me and see that I'm not a granola chomping liberal hippie stereotype. I am liberal, but I'm going to tell you that as a man, I can't with a good conscience sit around and not talk about this when, we're losing 30 soccer fields of soil every minute, mostly due to intensive farming. So big ag is another problem. Species dying off is a problem. Global warming is a problem. It's all climate change. And I think that part of what happens is people tend to think of all of these issues as being sort of in a vacuum or not really something they see in your day-to-day life. Now, I can't imagine that there's a lot of people in agriculture, especially rural farmers, who are climate change deniers. I mean, they see the effects of it all the time. I mean, I'm sure there are, but it's hard for me to wrap my head around that. I can't imagine, dealing with an ever-changing climate and not at least, putting some sort of acknowledgement on there. Now, I mean, decades ago, the way it was sold to us is that, the route to climate change is for each individual person to make choices to reduce our carbon footprint. That's what's been told to me throughout most of my life, and it's still true to a point. But unfortunately, we've let it go for so long that individual action is no longer enough. Now it's a big worldwide issue, okay? So how do we deal with that? How do we deal with this big giant worldwide issue when we can't even sort out how to elect a halfway decent person to lead us? Okay, and we need our leaders to channel our resources and our money towards developing and deploying the technologies needed to mitigate this. And I don't see any movement from our leadership on either side that is effectively doing this. Either side. I see one side talking about it, the other side denying about it. I don't see either of them pushing our spending in that direction. I mean, and I think that's a problem. I mean, we have other issues to think about too, like healthcare and human rights and whatever else. I mean, the problem is, though, is we can't engage and change any of those things for the better if there isn't a planet to do that on. And I guess that's part of my problem is I feel like we've reached a critical juncture in history where we kind of have to start pushing the brakes on the rest of all of these issues and start stomping on the gas pedal. I guess that's kind of an ironic way to say it, but we need to accelerate our work against climate change. And I don't know how to do that. I mean, when I'm looking at candidates and I'm looking at, both sides of the political spectrum, I mean, there's very little hope on the far right. I mean, none of us know what the hell they're doing. They're talking about some unscientific shit about the American way and not really doing anything to help the planet at all, but rather, they're trapping people in issues of fear and contention. Now, on the left, what I'm seeing is a lot of big talk about fixing the climate. And there's lots of little organizations and stuff that are trying to develop technologies and whatnot. But the problem is we are not devoting enough resources into retrofitting all of our technology, all of our agriculture, all of the ways we commute and the way we get around. I mean, we are very much, as a species, attached to sort of a modern lifestyle. But, I mean, what's the point? We're going to have to change something. I think I'd rather survive and then try again, than to just, go straight into the sixth mass extinction of the planet. But that's just me. I mean, I tend to be a bit of a pragmatist, and I don't really think that conservatives or liberals have the answer. Hell, scientists don't even have an answer yet. They just have a general idea of where the fuck they think we should go, and I think that's who we should be listening to. I think when it comes to the climate, we should be listening to scientists, not politicians, not religious figures, not anybody like that, because you know what? They're the only people that are actually out there fucking looking at it and doing the work. The rest of them are just fucking paid idiots that talk on television. Did I say that out loud? Anyways, so I mean, for those of you who are my friends or new fans or whatever, I hope you're not too offended by the way I'm looking at things. I'm not picking one side in terms of liberal or conservative. I'm picking the side of life, and if any of you are doing anything to stop that, I'm against you. Okay, and if you're not trying to fight that, and if you want life to continue, then we're together, and that's what we need to be. Is we need to be working together. We need to put our differences aside. We need to put our beliefs on the back burner, and we need to start figuring out what, as a global population, we can do to get the right leadership to start making some of this shit happen before we've stepped over a line where we've gone too far. So, I don't know. For those of you who are watching, I definitely appreciate your time. Now, I guess my question now is, what do you do with your friends and family? What do you do with your very much respectable relative who's a little bit moderate? How do you have that conversation with them? Well, you could take a little bit of a milder approach than what I did and just talk about where you're hedging your bets. If it's a hoax and you believed it, okay, you were deceived. If it's not a hoax and you chose not to believe it, then you contributed to the death of our species. I think that I'm going to hedge my bets on believing that climate change needs to be addressed, whether or not it is in fact a hoax. I mean, as a consumer of science, I can clearly tell you that it's not. I mean, I used to be a little bit of a participant in the scientific community, and I know how to digest and avidly consume science. And And I can tell you, it's not a fucking hoax. It's real. And here we are, not just in the 11 o'clock hour, but, 2 minutes to midnight, right? I mean, that's where we're at on the clock. We're almost done. And there's still some things we could probably do, but we're not doing them. Instead, we're quibbling about a wall. We're quibbling about who belongs in what country. We're quibbling about wages and jobs and, how okay it is to be this much gay or not. I mean, on some level, those are all important issues, but I don't think they're anywhere close to as important as continued survival of the species. And I guess that's where I'm at with everything right now. I mean, what's the point in having any other conversation until we've fixed this? Like, I'm not saying that they're not worth thinking about and that they don't need to be done, but you can't do those after the human race has gone extinct. There's kind of a hierarchy, a priority of needs there, and we need to survive first. Maslow's hierarchy works just the same for the entire species as it does for an individual, and survival comes first. I think where a lot of people get lost in this whole thing is that it's not like it's next year. It's going to be our grandchildren. And, I think Western civilization has made that choice and that a sort of erroneous assumption that, well, it's not affecting my generation. So why do I need to think about it? Leave that for people to solve in the future. The problem with that is simple. You can't solve it in the future. We're already approaching the line where we're too late. I mean, this is it. It has to be solved now because it takes time to put all this shit into effect and get things working right. I mean, there's no evidence out there to suggest that it can totally be fixed. All the species that we've lost are gone. You know, ice caps, I'm assuming, take a very long time to reform. The sea level isn't going to just go away overnight. But what we can do is start working to meet that 1.5 degrees Celsius benchmark. And we're not going to do that through individual action alone. There has to be drastic change in leadership and a drastic change in the way we direct our money and resources to make that happen. I mean, sure, it inconveniences our generation and maybe part of the next generation, but to guarantee the future survival of the species, it seems like a small price to pay. I think that we can probably pedal back on shoveling money into the military industrial complex a little bit to make sure we still have a planet to fight wars on. I mean, I guess I don't understand the logic that people have with this problem. It just doesn't make fucking sense the way y'all think about it. For those of you on the far right, I think I've made my point pretty obvious, but for those of you on the far left, I think the way you're having the conversation is all wrong. I mean, and I think that the way I'm talking about it during this video, in a sense, kind of paints that a little bit. I'm kind of fed up. I kind of feel like both sides are failing. I mean, uh, I know that a lot of people are working, in volunteer nonprofit organizations and maybe some in the corporate sector working toward developing green technologies and things like that. And those are not the people I'm talking about. I'm talking about my average peer cohort on both sides of the political spectrum. It's like, are we going to make the 2020 election cycle about anything but climate? If either side does, then both sides have failed. I'm just going to put it out there like that. It can't be about anything but climate change at this point. And if it is, then I don't respect you. I can't. I can't because you're making a willful choice to just flush things down the toilet, and I just can't get behind that. Um, so I mean, my suggestion is that people of all kinds, of all walks of life, of all intelligences, of all beliefs, of all political affiliations, should be able to agree that dying sucks and that us fucking the planet up so bad that our kids or their kids' kids or their grandchildren dying sucks, and it sucks of us to be letting it go on. I think all of us should be able to fucking agree on that, right? If we can, then maybe there's something we can do. I mean, I haven't figured it out yet, but I think that our next election is a good place to start, and it's time to start putting that, up both party lines, up, up the ladder of information. This needs to go up both sides. That everything else you think right now is fucking stupid. We need to focus on the climate so that we can go back to being stupid later. But right now, we need to make a smart choice as a species and do something about the planet. Okay, usually I'm not quite this opinionated. I'm more just informational, but right now I'm just being how I am. So, for those of you that have made it this far in the video, I appreciate you. Thank you for tuning in. Please click like, subscribe, and share. Support us on Patreon. I want to shout out to True and Craig for becoming patrons and helping me upgrade some of my video software. And until next time, my friends, take care of yourselves.